the summer she was left behind. The train's whistle cut through the Montana heat like a blade, and Elena Cross stepped onto the platform with her single carpet bag, searching the crowd for a face she'd never seen. She found him easily, the only man holding a photograph, comparing it to her face. Their eyes met. He looked at the picture again, then at her widening hips, her sun-reddened cheeks, the way her dress pulled tight across her chest. Without a word, he tore the photograph in half, dropped the pieces at her feet, and walked away. The platform fell silent. The train began to pull away, and Elena Cross realized she had nowhere left to go. Welcome to a story of abandonment, survival, and unexpected grace on the Montana frontier. If this story moves you, please leave a like and comment with your city so I can see how far Elena's journey reaches across the world. Now, let's begin. The dust settled slowly after the train departed, a golden haze that hung in the afternoon air like a veil between Elena and the small crowd still gathered on the platform. She stood frozen, staring at the torn photograph at her feet, half her face looking up from the weathered planks, half trampled into the dirt by the boot of the man who was supposed to become her husband. The silence pressed against her ears with physical weight. She'd imagined this moment 1,000 times during the 3-week journey west from Philadelphia. The nervous greeting, the awkward conversation, the slow walk to whatever future awaited her. She'd prepared herself for disappointment, even prepared herself for a man who might be unkind. But she had not prepared herself for this. Public rejection so complete it required no words, only a glance and a gesture that reduced her entire existence to something unworthy of keeping. "Well?" The voice came from somewhere to her left, female and sharp with something between pity and satisfaction. "I suppose that's that then." Elena turned slowly, her legs trembling beneath her gray traveling dress. The nicest thing she owned, carefully pressed that morning in the sleeping car with hands that had shaken with anticipation rather than dread. A woman in a green bustle dress stood beside the station house, fanning herself with deliberate slowness, her eyes bright with the kind of interest that feeds on other people's misfortune. "Thomas Garrett is a particular man," the woman continued, addressing the remaining onlookers more than Elena herself. "Can't fault him for knowing what he wants. Mail-order arrangements are always a gamble, aren't they? Sometimes the photograph doesn't quite match the reality." The words landed like stones. Elena felt her face burn, heat crawling up her neck that had nothing to do with the relentless sun. She wanted to speak, to defend herself, to explain that the photograph had been taken only 4 months ago and was perfectly accurate, that she was exactly who she'd claimed to be in her letters. But her throat had closed around the words, trapping them somewhere between her heart and her mouth. "Martha, that's enough." An older man in a shopkeeper's apron shot the woman a disapproving look before turning to Elena with something closer to genuine sympathy. "Miss, is there someone we can wire for you? Family back east who could send train fare?" The question, kindly meant, nearly undid her completely. Elena shook her head, not trusting herself to speak. There was no one. Her parents had died of typhoid fever 2 years ago, within days of each other. Her aunt, who'd taken her in afterward, had made it clear that Elena's presence was a burden, another mouth to feed in a household already stretched thin. The advertisement for mail-order brides had seemed like providence, a chance to build a new life, to be wanted, to matter to someone. "I have a little money," she managed finally, her voice sounding strange and distant to her own ears. "Perhaps there's a boarding house." "The boarding house is full," Martha interjected, snapping her fan closed with a decisive click. "Miners came through last week, took every bed. And anyway, a young woman alone—" She let the implication hang in the air, laden with judgment. The platform began to empty. The initial spectacle had passed, and people were returning to their lives, their routines, their ordinary Friday afternoon business. Elena watched them go with a detached sort of panic, as if she were observing her own disaster from a great distance. The sun hammered down on the wooden platform, turning the air thick and difficult to breathe. Her carpet bag suddenly felt impossibly heavy, though it contained everything she owned: 2 dresses, a nightgown, undergarments, her mother's Bible, a silver locket, and the bundle of letters from Thomas Garrett that had painted a picture of a life she would now never live. She bent slowly and picked up the torn pieces of her photograph, smoothing them against her skirt with fingers that had started to shake. In the picture, she looked hopeful. Young and hopeful, and stupidly naive. "You should take the evening train back," the shopkeeper said gently. "It comes through at 6. I'm sure Thomas would at least—" "Mr. Garrett made his position clear, Henry." Martha had moved closer, her voice dropping to a stage whisper that still carried across the platform. "The girl misrepresented herself. Look at her. She's twice the size of that photograph. He has every right to refuse the arrangement." I've gained no weight," Elena said quietly, finally finding her voice even as something inside her began to fracture. "The photograph is accurate. I'm exactly who I claim to be." Martha's eyebrows lifted. "Well, that may be your opinion, dear, but clearly Mr. Garrett sees things differently. These arrangements require honesty, you understand. When a man sends for a bride, he expects— What does he expect?" The words came out sharper than Elena intended, propelled by a sudden flame of anger that burned through her shock. "A commodity? A purchase that can be returned if it doesn't meet specifications?" The shopkeeper, Henry, cleared his throat uncomfortably. Martha's face tightened with disapproval, and Elena realized she'd made a mistake. In this moment, in this place, she had no right to anger. She was the rejected bride, the woman found wanting, the outsider who'd arrived with expectations that had proven embarrassingly unfounded. Anger was a luxury she couldn't afford. "I apologize," she said, the words tasting like ash. I'm not myself." Understandably so. Henry shifted his weight, clearly wishing to be anywhere else. "Miss, truly, the evening train would be your best option. You could be back in Denver by tomorrow, find work there perhaps, in one of the hotels, or— I don't have fare back to Denver." The admission cost her something, a final stripping away of dignity. "I used everything I had to come here." The silence that followed held a different quality. Heavier, more awkward, tinged with the uncomfortable realization that this situation had no easy resolution. Martha made a small sound of impatience and turned away, clearly done with a problem that had become too complicated for her afternoon entertainment. Henry rubbed his jaw, looking genuinely distressed. "There might be work," he said finally. "Mrs. Chen at the restaurant sometimes needs help, or the hotel might require a chambermaid." "It won't be much, but it would be honest work until you could save enough for passage back to—" "The hotel won't hire her." Martha had paused at the edge of the platform, turning back with the air of someone delivering an unwelcome truth. "Catherine runs a respectable establishment. She won't take on a woman with this kind of situation attached to her name. The whole town will know about this by supper time, Henry, and you know it." She was right, and they all knew it. In a town this size, Elena could see perhaps 24 buildings from where she stood. Scandal spread like wildfire across dry grass. By evening, everyone would know that Thomas Garrett had taken one look at his mail-order bride and rejected her on the platform. The whispers would follow her everywhere. Too plain, too heavy, too something. Not enough. Henry opened his mouth to respond, but movement at the far end of the platform caught Elena's attention. Two figures were approaching, a man and a small child. The man moved with this easy, ground-covering stride of someone accustomed to walking long distances, his worn hat pulled low against the sun. The child, a girl of perhaps 6 or 7, skipped beside him, her hand clasped in his. They reached the platform just as Martha departed with a swish of green skirts, her departure somehow more cutting than her presence. The man paused, taking in the scene with eyes that missed nothing. Elena with her carpet bag and her torn photograph, Henry's uncomfortable posture, the empty platform, and the lingering atmosphere of witnessed humiliation. "Afternoon, Henry," he said, his voice carrying the roughness of someone who spent more time with horses than people. "Train on time today?" "Caleb." Henry's relief at the interruption was palpable. Yes, it was. Just dropped off." He hesitated, clearly unsure how to describe Elena's situation. "I can see what it dropped off." Caleb's gaze shifted to Elena, and she found herself meeting eyes that were startling in their directness, gray as winter sky, set in a face weathered by sun and wind. He wasn't old, perhaps 35, but he carried himself with the solid presence of someone who'd earned his place in the world through work rather than charm. Miss. The child peered around her father's leg, studying Elena with the frank curiosity of the young. She had dark hair in two neat braids, and her father's gray eyes, though hers held warmth where his held caution. Is that lady going to cry, Papa? The girl whispered, not quite quietly enough. Mia. The name was gentle but firm, a father's redirection. Elena realized her eyes had indeed filled with tears, though she'd been fighting them back. She blinked rapidly, turning away under the pretense of adjusting her bag. The platform planks beneath her feet felt unsteady, or perhaps that was just her legs finally giving way to the shock that had been building since Thomas Garrett walked away. I should be going, she managed, though she had no idea where she intended to go. The sun was beginning its slow descent toward the western mountains, but hours of heat remained. The street beyond the platform offered no obvious sanctuary, just the general store, a saloon, a few other buildings she couldn't identify from this distance. Just a moment, miss. Caleb's voice stopped her. Henry, what's the situation here? Henry explained in low tones, though Elena could hear every word. The story sounded even worse in summary. The mail order arrangement, the rejection, the lack of funds or prospects. As he spoke, Caleb's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the set of his shoulders, a tension that might have been anger or might have been something else entirely. Thomas Garrett did this? He asked when Henry finished. He has every right to refuse, Henry began. I didn't ask about his rights. I asked if he left a woman stranded with no means and no place to go. Caleb's voice had gone quiet in a way that suggested more threat than shouting ever could. Where is he now? Caleb, don't start something. The situation is regrettable, but it's not your concern. Like hell it isn't. Caleb looked at Elena again, his gaze moving from her face to her bag to the torn photograph still clutched in her hand. You have any skills, miss? Can you cook, clean, handle livestock? The question was so unexpected that Elena could only stare at him for a moment. Yes. I kept house for my aunt. I can cook plain meals. I've tended chickens and... My daughter and I live about 5 miles south of here. Ranch work, cattle, some horses, chickens, a vegetable garden that's mostly dying because I can't tend it proper. My wife passed 2 years ago, and I've been managing poorly ever since. He said it matter-of-factly, without self-pity, just stating the situation as he might describe the weather. I could use help. You could use a place to stay. Temporary arrangement until you figure out your next move. Henry made a sound of protest. Caleb, that's not... People will talk. A young unmarried woman staying at your ranch, let them talk. They'll talk anyway about what happened here today. Caleb's jaw tightened. At least this way she'll have a roof over her head while they're doing it. Elena's mind reeled, trying to process this sudden shift from complete disaster to unexpected rescue. But something in her resisted the word rescue. This man wasn't offering charity, he was proposing an arrangement. Work in exchange for shelter. It had a dignity to it that pure charity would have lacked. I would work hard, she heard herself say. I wouldn't be a burden. Didn't figure you would be. Well, Caleb's expression softened almost imperceptibly. But I won't lie to you, it's hard living out there. The work is constant, the house needs everything, and Mia... He looked down at his daughter with something that might have been helplessness. She needs things I can't give her. Gentleness, teaching. The kind of care a man doesn't know how to provide. Mia tugged on her father's sleeve. Is the lady coming home with us, Papa? That's up to the lady, little bird. They both looked at Elena, the taciturn rancher and his watchful daughter, and Elena realized that this moment, this choice, would define everything that came after. She could refuse, could insist on waiting for some other solution, could cling to the idea that surely there was a better option than following a stranger to an isolated ranch. Or she could accept that sometimes providence came in unexpected forms, and that pride was another luxury she couldn't afford. I'll come, she said quietly, and I'll earn my keep, I promise you that. Caleb nodded once, as if they'd just concluded a business transaction. Wagon's just down the street. We'll get you settled before dark. As they walked toward town, Mia slipped her small hand into Elena's. The gesture was so natural, so trusting, that Elena felt something crack open in her chest, all the fear and humiliation and desperate uncertainty finding a small outlet in the warmth of a child's hand. Behind them, Henry called out something about being careful, about considering the propriety of the situation. But his voice faded as they moved away from the platform, away from the sight of Elena's public rejection, toward a future she couldn't begin to imagine. The wagon was exactly what Elena expected, functional and worn, built for work rather than comfort. Caleb lifted Mia into the back with easy strength, then turned to help Elena up. His hands on her waist were brief and impersonal, but even that simple touch felt strange after months of living in her aunt's house where she'd been treated like an inconvenient ghost. "Thank you," she said as she settled onto the hard bench seat. For not leaving me there." Caleb climbed up beside her and gathered the reins. A man who'd leave a woman stranded isn't a man worth knowing. Thomas Garrett just showed everyone exactly what he's made of, and it isn't much. They pulled away from town as the afternoon sun painted everything in shades of gold and amber. Elena watched the buildings recede, watched the platform where her future had shattered become just another point in the landscape. She thought about Thomas Garrett tearing her photograph, about Martha's sharp satisfaction, about the weight of being found wanting. But she also thought about Caleb's quiet anger on her behalf, about Mia's hand in hers, about the possibility, however slim, that sometimes the worst moments open doors to something better. The road south cut through open grassland that rolled away toward distant mountains. The air smelled of sage and dust and something else, a wildness that had no name but that Elena could taste with every breath. The heat pressed down relentlessly, but there was a beauty to it too, a harsh grandeur that made her feel very small and somehow, paradoxically, less alone. Mia chattered from the back of the wagon, telling Elena about the chickens and the garden and her favorite horse, a gentle mare named Clover. Caleb drove in silence, his attention on the road, but Elena sensed he was listening to his daughter's words with the careful attention of a man who'd learned to treasure them. "We had a housekeeper for a while," Mia said suddenly, Mrs. Patterson. "But she left because she said Papa was too quiet and the ranch was too lonely." Mia. There was warning in Caleb's voice, but also resignation, the tone of a father who'd learned his daughter would say exactly what she thought, regardless of redirection. "It's true, Papa. She said you didn't talk enough, and there was nothing to do except work." Mia leaned forward, her small face appearing between Elena and Caleb. "Are you going to leave too?" The question was so direct, so vulnerably honest, that Elena felt her throat tighten. "I don't know what the future holds," she said carefully, "but I'm here now, and I'll work as hard as I can for as long as I stay." It was the only honest answer she could give, and Mia seemed to accept it. She settled back into the wagon bed, humming a tuneless song that drifted away on the hot wind. They traveled in silence for a long stretch. The only sounds, the creak of the wagon, the steady clip of hooves, and the occasional call of a bird from the scrubland. Elena felt the last of her adrenaline fade, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion that made even sitting upright feel like an effort. The morning's hope had curdled into afternoon's humiliation and now evening's strange new reality. Her mind kept trying to process it all, but the pieces wouldn't fit together into anything coherent. "You'll have your own room," Caleb said finally, breaking the silence. "It's not much, used to be storage, but it has a window and a bed. You'll take meals with us. Work will be sunrise to sundown most days. Sundays off, except for essential chores." He was outlining terms, establishing boundaries, making sure she understood this was an employment arrangement and nothing else. Elena appreciated the clarity, the lack of ambiguity. After the chaos of the day, there was comfort in simple, direct communication. "That's more than fair," she said. "It's what's right." Caleb glanced at her briefly, then back to the road. "I won't have people saying I took advantage of your situation. You work, you get room and board. We'll figure out wages once I see what you can do. That agreeable?" "Yes." Another stretch of silence, then, "About what happened back there, with Garrett." Caleb's jaw worked, as if he was choosing his words carefully. "What he did was cruelty, plain and simple. Had nothing to do with you and everything to do with him being a small man with a smaller heart. I want you to know that." The unexpected kindness in his words nearly undid her. Elena stared straight ahead, willing herself not to cry, not to fall apart now when she'd managed to hold herself together through everything else. He looked at me like I was livestock that didn't meet standards, she said quietly. Then he's a fool. Caleb said it simply, a statement of fact rather than comfort. A woman's worth isn't in her face or her figure. It's in her character, her strength, what she does when life gets hard. He paused. You stood on that platform with everyone watching, no money, no prospects, and you didn't fall apart. That tells me more about who you are than any photograph ever could. Elena did cry then, but quietly, letting the tears slip down her face without wiping them away. They were different from the tears she'd fought back earlier. These weren't tears of humiliation, but of something like relief, or perhaps just the release of a tension she hadn't known she was carrying. Mia started singing again from the back of the wagon, something about mockingbirds and diamond rings, her child's voice pure and unselfconscious. The sun continued its descent, painting the grassland in deeper shades of gold. And Elena Cross, who'd started the day expecting to become someone's wife, let herself cry for the future she'd lost while riding toward a future she couldn't yet imagine, held together by nothing more than a stranger's unexpected kindness and a child's small hand. The ranch appeared as the sun touched the western mountains, a cluster of buildings that looked weathered but solid, built to withstand seasons and storms. The main house was larger than Elena expected, 2 stories of dark wood with a wide porch that wrapped around the front. A barn stood off to one side, and beyond it she could see a corral, several smaller outbuildings, and the neat rows of what must be the struggling vegetable garden Caleb had mentioned. As they drew closer, Elena could see the signs of a place where one man was trying to do the work of 3. Fences that needed mending, shutters that hung slightly askew, weeds encroaching on the garden beds. But there was also evidence of care. The barn was well maintained, the animals in the corral looked healthy, and despite the wear, everything had the air of a working ranch rather than a neglected one. Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop near the house and helped first Mia, then Elena, down. The child immediately ran toward the barn, calling out to the horses. Caleb watched her go with an expression Elena was learning to recognize, love mixed with a kind of helpless uncertainty, as if he was never quite sure he was raising her right. "Come on," he said, picking up Elena's carpet bag. "I'll show you around." The house was dim and cool after the bright heat outside. Elena's eyes adjusted slowly, revealing a large main room that served as kitchen and living area. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and rough-hewn furniture, a table, chairs, a worn sofa, filled the space. Everything was clean but spare, functional rather than comfortable. There were no curtains on the windows, no rugs on the floor, none of the small touches that made a house feel like a home. "Kitchen's there, obviously." Caleb gestured to the area where a cast-iron stove stood beside shelves of basic supplies. "Pumps out back for water. Pantry's stocked well enough, though I'm no cook, so meals have been simple." He led her up a narrow staircase to the second floor, where 3 doors opened off a small hallway. "Mia's room, my room, and this one here." He opened the 3rd door, revealing a small space with a single bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. "It's not much, but it's yours for as long as you need it." Elena stepped into the room, setting her carpet bag on the bed. The space was indeed small, barely large enough for the furniture it contained, but it had a window with real glass and a door that closed, and that was more privacy than she'd had in her aunt's house where she'd slept in a corner of the attic. "It's perfect," she said quietly. "Thank you." When she turned, Caleb was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You've had a hell of a day," he said. "Why don't you rest for a bit? Get yourself settled. I'll call you when supper's ready." But Elena shook her head. "I'd rather work, if it's all the same to you. I think I need to do something useful." Understanding flickered across Caleb's face. He nodded. "All right then, let's start with supper. Show me what you can do with beans and salt pork." They went back downstairs together, and Elena surveyed the kitchen with the practiced eye of someone who'd been cooking since she was tall enough to reach the stove. The basics were there, good cookware, though it needed a thorough cleaning, adequate supplies, even some herbs hanging dried near the window. She could work with this. As she tied on an apron she found hanging on a peg and began pulling out what she needed, Caleb leaned against the doorframe watching. "You know what you're doing," he observed. I kept house for my aunt and her family. 7 people total, all of them particular about their meals. Elena began slicing salt pork with efficient movements. I learned young that if you want peace, you make sure the food is good. Your aunt, she treated you well? The question was casual, but Elena sensed the weight behind it. She considered lying, smoothing over the truth with platitudes about family duty and gratitude. But something about this man's direct honesty seemed to demand the same in return. She gave me a place to live after my parents died. I'm grateful for that. But no, she didn't treat me well. I was convenient, free labor, someone to mind the children and do the washing and disappear when company came because I was a poor relation, and that reflected badly. The words came out more bitter than she intended. Elena focused on the salt pork, cutting it into precise cubes, channeling her emotions into the knife work. So you took the first escape you could find, Caleb said softly. Even if it meant marrying a stranger. Even if it meant that. Elena moved to the stove, stoking the fire. I thought it would be a fresh start, a chance to build something of my own, to matter to someone. And instead you got Thomas Garrett. Instead I got humiliated in front of half the town. Elena's hands stilled on the skillet. Do you know him, Garrett? Well enough to know you're better off without him. Caleb's voice had gone hard again. He runs a feed store, thinks highly of himself, treats his employees poorly. Word is he's been through 2 mail-order arrangements before this one. First woman got here and found out he'd lied about owning his business. Turned out he just managed it for his uncle. She left on the next train. Second one stayed for 3 months, then ran off with a ranch hand. Elena absorbed this, trying to reconcile it with the man who'd carefully composed letters about building a life together, about wanting a partner, about being lonely in this big country. He wrote such nice letters, she said quietly. I imagine he did. Some men are better on paper than in person. Caleb pushed off from the doorframe. I'll let you work. Holler if you need anything. He left her alone in the kitchen, and Elena let herself sink into the familiar rhythm of cooking. She fried the salt pork until it was crisp, then used the fat to sauté wild onions she found in the pantry. Beans that had been soaking went into a pot with water, some of the dried herbs, a pinch of precious sugar to cut the bitterness. While it all simmered, she made biscuits from flour, lard, and buttermilk, her hands remembering the proportions her mother had taught her years ago. As she worked, Mia wandered in and out, fascinated by the activity. The girl was obviously starved for female company, asking questions about everything. Where Elena was from, what Philadelphia was like, whether she knew any songs, whether she could braid hair better than Papa could. Papa tries, Mia confided, perching on a chair to watch Elena roll out biscuit dough. But his fingers are too big and the braids always come loose. Sometimes I do them myself, but they're all crooked. I could braid your hair tomorrow morning, if you'd like, Elena offered. Mia's face lit up with such pure joy that Elena felt her battered heart expand slightly. This child at least wanted her here. This child didn't find her lacking. Supper was ready as the last light faded from the sky. Elena called Caleb in from whatever work he'd been doing in the barn, and they sat down together at the rough table. The taciturn rancher, his talkative daughter, and the woman who'd been rejected that afternoon and somehow, impossibly, found herself here. Caleb took his first bite of beans and went still. He looked at Elena, something like surprise crossing his features. This is good, he said. Really good. It's just beans and salt pork. It's the first meal I've had in 2 years that tasted like something worth eating. He took another bite and another. Mrs. Patterson couldn't cook worth a damn, and I'm worse. We've been surviving on charred meat and burnt biscuits for a long while. Mia nodded enthusiastically, her mouth full. When she swallowed, she announced, Papa makes everything taste like smoke. I do not. You do, Papa. Even the eggs taste like smoke. Despite everything, the exhaustion, the lingering humiliation, the strangeness of being in this place with these people, Elena found herself smiling. There was something deeply normal about this exchange, something grounding about sitting at a table and sharing a meal while a child teased her father. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the kind that came not from having nothing to say, but from being tired and hungry and focused on the food. When they finished, Elena stood to clear the dishes, but Caleb stopped her with a raised hand. "You cooked. Mia and I will clean up. That's how it works here. Everyone contributes." So Elena watched as the big rancher and his small daughter worked together to clear the table and wash the dishes, their movements practiced and comfortable. Mia stood on a stool to reach the washing basin, and Caleb dried with a dish towel, and the simple domesticity of it all made Elena's eyes sting with tears she didn't quite understand. When the kitchen was clean, Caleb sent Mia upstairs to get ready for bed. The girl hugged Elena goodnight, a fierce, spontaneous embrace that nearly knocked Elena backward, before thundering up the stairs with the unselfconscious noise of a happy child. Alone with Caleb again, Elena felt suddenly awkward. The evening had taken on an intimacy she hadn't anticipated, sitting at his table, feeding his child, watching him move through his home. She was a stranger here, she reminded herself. An employee, nothing more. "You must be exhausted," Caleb said, seeming to sense her discomfort. "Tomorrow will be soon enough to talk about work. Tonight, just rest." "Thank you." Elena hesitated, then asked the question that had been building since they left town. "Why did you help me? You don't know anything about me. I could be anything, anyone." Caleb considered this, his gray eyes thoughtful in the lamplight. "My wife," he said finally. "She came west as a mail-order bride too. That's how we met. She arrived in town with nothing but a carpet bag and a lot of hope, and her intended had died 2 weeks before. Influenza. She was stranded, same as you, and if someone hadn't helped her..." He paused, his throat working. "She was the best thing that ever happened to me. When I saw you on that platform today, I saw her. I saw what could have happened if no one had stepped in." The confession hung in the air between them, heavy with memory and loss. Elena understood then that this offer of refuge was about more than kindness. It was about honoring the memory of someone who'd needed help once and received it. "I'm sorry," she said softly, "about your wife." "So am I." Caleb turned away, but not before Elena saw the flash of pain across his face. "Get some rest. Morning comes early on a ranch." Elena climbed the stairs to her small room, her body finally beginning to register the full weight of the day's events. She changed into her nightgown, washed her face with water from the pitcher on the dresser, and sat on the edge of the narrow bed. Through the window, she could see stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. More stars than she'd ever seen in Philadelphia, scattered across the heavens like diamonds on velvet. Somewhere out there was the town where she'd been rejected. Somewhere out there was Thomas Garrett, probably already forgetting the woman he'd dismissed. And somewhere out there was the future she'd imagined, dissolving like mist. But here, in this small room in this weathered ranch house, was a different kind of future, uncertain and undefined, built on nothing more solid than a stranger's kindness and a child's need. Elena wasn't naive enough to think this arrangement would last forever, or that she'd found some fairy tale ending to her disaster. But for tonight, she had a bed and a roof and the lingering warmth of being treated with basic human decency. It was enough. For now, it was enough. She lay down and closed her eyes, and despite everything, despite the trauma and uncertainty and fear, she fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted by loss and lulled by the unfamiliar sounds of this new place. Wind in the grass, the distant lowing of cattle, and below her window the quiet footsteps of a man checking the locks and banking the fire before heading to his own lonely bed. The summer heat would continue. The work would be hard. The future remained unclear, but Elena Cross had survived the worst day of her life, and in surviving it, had somehow found the first threads of something that might, eventually, feel like home. Elena woke to unfamiliar sounds, the low of cattle, the creak of floorboards below, and birdsong that seemed to come from every direction at once. For a moment she lay disoriented in the pre-dawn darkness, unable to place herself. Then memory returned in a cold rush, the platform, the torn photograph, Thomas Garrett's dismissive glance. She sat up quickly, as if movement could outrun the shame that came with remembering. Through the window, the sky was beginning to lighten at the edges, turning from black to deep blue. Elena dressed quickly in the dim light, choosing her older work dress and pinning her hair back with shaking fingers. Her reflection in the small mirror above the dresser showed a face that looked hollowed out by exhaustion, dark circles under eyes that seemed too large. She looked away. Downstairs, she found Caleb already in the kitchen, attempting to start the stove with the grim determination of a man who'd failed at this task many times before. He looked up when she entered, surprise flickering across his weathered features. "Didn't expect you up this early," he said. "I'm used to early mornings." Elena moved toward the stove without thinking, years of household routine taking over. "Let me." She had the fire going properly within minutes, working with practiced efficiency while Caleb watched from the doorway. The kitchen began to warm as she pulled out flour and eggs, moving through the space as if taking inventory of its possibilities. "Coffee's in the blue tin," Caleb offered. "Though fair warning, I make it strong enough to strip paint." "Strong is fine." Elena found the tin and measured grounds into the pot, adding water from the pump. "When does Mia wake?" "Depends on the day. Sometimes dawn, sometimes not till the sun's well up." He paused. "She'll want those braids you promised." The simple statement carried unexpected weight, a reminder that Elena's words mattered here, that someone was counting on her to keep them. She nodded, focusing on slicing salt pork for breakfast. The familiar work steadied her, gave her hands something to do while her mind tried to make sense of this new reality. They worked in companionable silence, Caleb eventually settling at the table with his coffee while Elena cooked. The eastern sky turned gold, then pink, light spilling through the windows and illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. There was something peaceful about this hour, Elena thought, something that felt suspended between yesterday's disaster and whatever today would bring. Mia appeared as Elena was plating eggs and fried pork, the girl's hair a wild tangle around her sleep-flushed face. She climbed into her father's lap without preamble, burying her face in his shoulder. "Morning, little bird," Caleb murmured, his voice gentle in a way that transformed his whole presence. Elena made breakfast. The girl peered at the table, then at Elena, as if testing whether yesterday had been real or dreamed. "You stayed," she said finally. "I did." "Good." Mia slid from her father's lap and into her own chair with the decisive air of someone who'd made an important decision. "Can you really braid hair?" After breakfast, Elena sat Mia on a stool near the window and carefully worked through the tangles in the child's dark hair. Caleb had left for the barn, but Elena could hear him moving around outside, the sounds of morning chores beginning. She separated Mia's hair into sections, her fingers remembering the motions her mother had taught her long ago. "Mama used to do this," Mia said quietly, "but I don't remember it very well. Just the feeling, sort of, like being safe." Elena's hands stilled for a moment. "How old were you when she passed?" 4.5. Papa says I look like her, but I don't remember her face exactly. Just pieces. Her singing, the way she smelled like bread and soap." Mia's voice was matter-of-fact, but Elena heard the loss underneath. "Do you miss your mama?" "Every day?" Elena resumed braiding, making each plait tight and even. "She died when I was 16. My father, too." "That's sad." Mia was quiet for a moment, then, "Papa gets sad sometimes. He tries to hide it, but I can tell. He goes real quiet and his eyes look far away." The child's perceptiveness caught Elena off guard. She finished the first braid and started on the second, choosing her words carefully. "Losing someone you love is hard. It takes a long time to stop hurting." "Has it stopped hurting for you?" "Not completely, but it hurts less than it used to." Mia absorbed this, tilting her head to examine her reflection in the window glass. "Will Papa stop hurting someday?" "I think so. People are stronger than they know." When both braids were finished, Mia jumped down and ran to the small mirror hanging near the door, turning her head from side to side to admire the work. "They're perfect. They're so neat and pretty, and they're not crooked at all." She spun around, her whole face lit with joy. "Can you do them every morning?" "We'll see," Elena said, unwilling to make promises about a future she couldn't predict. "For now, why don't you show me that garden your papa mentioned?" The vegetable garden was indeed struggling. Elena surveyed the rows with a critical eye, noting the weeds choking the bean plants, the tomatoes desperate for water, the squash vines wilting in soil that had gone hard and cracked. But underneath the neglect, she could see the bones of a good garden. Someone had laid it out well, had known what they were doing. Mama planted this, Mia said, echoing Elena's thoughts. Papa keeps trying, but he says plants don't like him the way they liked her. Plants don't like or dislike anyone. They just need the right care. Elena knelt beside a struggling tomato plant, testing the soil with her fingers, dry as dust. They need water and weeding and attention. Your papa has been doing the work of 3 people. Something had to give. She stood, shading her eyes against the climbing sun as she looked around the property. Beyond the garden, she could see the chicken coop, the barn where Caleb had disappeared, the corral where several horses stood in drowsy morning contentment. It was a good piece of land, well situated and clearly once well tended. The evidence of decline was everywhere. A fence section sagging, shutters hanging askew, the porch steps worn and splintering. But it wasn't beyond saving, not yet. "Can you fix it?" Mia asked, watching Elena with eyes too old for her young face. "The garden, I mean. Can you make it like it was?" "I can try." Elena met the child's gaze. "But it will take work. A lot of work." "I can help. I'm a very good helper. Papa says so." Despite everything, Elena found herself smiling. "Then we'd better get started." They worked through the morning as the summer heat built, Elena pulling weeds while Mia hauled water in a bucket she could barely carry. The child was indeed a good helper, tireless and cheerful, chattering constantly about the ranch, her father, the horses, and a dozen other topics that seemed to have no particular order or connection. Elena listened with half her attention while her hands fell into the rhythm of the work, pull, toss, the weeds coming up in satisfying clumps. Caleb appeared around mid-morning, his shirt dark with sweat and his hat pushed back. He stopped at the edge of the garden, taking in the neat rows Elena had already cleared, the pile of weeds wilting in the sun. "You don't have to do this," he said. "I hired you for house help, not field work." Elena sat back on her heels, wiping her forehead with the back of her hand. "A garden is a garden. Seems a shame to let it die when it could be saved." He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded slowly. "Water barrels around back. Pump's been working steady. You need anything else? Come find me in the barn." As he turned to go, Elena called out, "Mr. Rowan?" He paused, looking back. "What should I call you? Mr. Rowan seems too formal for someone living in your house." "Caleb's fine." He shifted his weight, as if the informality made him uncomfortable. "We're not formal people out here." "Caleb, then." Elena tested the name, finding it fit him, solid and unpretentious. "And I'm Elena." "I know." Something that might have been humor flickered in his eyes. "You told me yesterday, on the platform." He left before she could respond, his long strides carrying him back toward the barn. Mia giggled, covering her mouth with dirty hands. "Papa's being shy," she announced. "He's not used to ladies." "I'm not a lady. I'm just someone who needed help." "You're a lady to me." Mia picked up her bucket with renewed determination. "Come on, the tomatoes are thirsty." By midday, Elena had cleared 3 full rows and watered everything she'd uncovered. Her back ached, her hands were filthy, and her dress was soaked with sweat, but the garden looked measurably better. She could see the potential now, could imagine what it might look like in a few weeks with proper care. Neat rows of vegetables, vines heavy with produce, the earth dark and healthy. She sent Mia to wash up and headed inside to start dinner, moving through the hot kitchen with mechanical efficiency. Her mind kept returning to the platform, to Thomas Garrett's dismissive glance, to the weight of being found wanting. But each time the memory threatened to overwhelm her, she forced her attention back to the present, the onions she was chopping, the bread dough she was kneading, the simple fact of being here, doing something useful, mattering in some small way. Dinner was beans and cornbread, served at the rough table while the afternoon heat pressed against the windows. Caleb ate with the single-minded focus of someone who viewed food as fuel rather than pleasure, but he cleaned his plate and accepted seconds without comment. Mia kept up a steady stream of conversation, telling her father about everything they'd accomplished in the garden. "Elena says the tomatoes will have fruit soon if we keep watering them," the girl reported. "And the beans aren't dead, they're just sad. We're going to make them happy again." "Is that so?" Caleb's gaze shifted to Elena. You know about gardens? My mother had one. I helped her tend it from the time I was small. Elena broke off a piece of cornbread, remembering her mother's hands in the soil, her patient instruction. A garden is like anything else. It responds to attention. Neglect it and it dies, but give it consistent care and it thrives. Sounds like raising children, Caleb said quietly. Or building a life. Elena hadn't meant to say it, but the words came anyway. You can't abandon something and expect it to flourish. The statement hung in the air, heavier than she'd intended. Caleb's expression shifted, something complicated moving behind his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or understanding of all the things she wasn't saying about yesterday, about being abandoned, about trying to build something from nothing. No, he agreed finally. You can't. After dinner, Elena cleaned the kitchen while Caleb disappeared to handle afternoon chores. Mia settled at the table with a slate and chalk, practicing letters with fierce concentration. Elena watched her from the corner of her eye as she worked, noting the way the child formed each character with painstaking care, her tongue caught between her teeth. Do you go to school? Elena asked. Mia shook her head without looking up. There's a school in town, but Papa says it's too far to ride every day, especially in winter. Mrs. Patterson taught me some, but she wasn't very patient. She said I was slow. Hey, may I see? Mia pushed the slate across the table, her expression anxious. Elena studied the letters. They were wobbly but recognizable, showing effort, if not expertise. For a child who'd had inconsistent instruction, they were actually quite good. You're not slow, Elena said firmly. You just need practice. Would you like help? The girl's face transformed with hope. Really? You'd teach me? I'm not a real teacher, but I can show you what I know. They spent the next hour working together, Elena gently correcting Mia's letter formation while the afternoon light slanted through the windows. It was peaceful work, quieter than the garden, but equally satisfying. The child was bright and eager, soaking up instruction like dry ground soaking up rain. When Caleb returned, he found them bent over the slate together, Mia carefully copying a simple sentence Elena had written. He stopped in the doorway, and Elena looked up to find him watching them with an expression she couldn't decipher, something between gratitude and pain, as if the simple domestic scene touched a wound he'd been trying to ignore. Time for chores, little bird, he said quietly. Mia groaned but obeyed, sliding from her chair with the dramatic reluctance of childhood. Can we do more letters tomorrow? She asked Elena. If your father doesn't mind. I don't mind. Caleb's voice was rough. Come on, Mia, chickens need feeding. Father and daughter headed out together, and Elena watched them through the window, the tall man and the small girl, moving in comfortable synchronization toward the chicken coop. There was love in every gesture, in the way Caleb automatically adjusted his stride to match Mia's shorter steps, in the way the child looked up at her father with absolute trust. Elena turned away, fighting an unexpected ache in her chest. She thought she was past wanting things for herself, past hoping for connection and belonging, but watching Caleb and Mia together stirred something she'd tried to bury, the longing to be part of something, to matter to someone, to build a life that meant more than just surviving day to day. She shook her head, clearing away the dangerous thoughts. She was here temporarily until she could figure out her next move. Getting attached, letting herself hope, that way lay only more heartbreak. The evening passed in quiet routine. After chores, they had a light supper of leftover cornbread and milk. Mia was tired, her earlier energy fading as the day's heat finally began to break. Caleb sent her to bed early, and Elena heard him upstairs, his deep voice reading something that made Mia giggle. When he came back down, Elena was finishing the dishes, the kitchen clean and ready for tomorrow. Caleb poured himself coffee from the pot that was always simmering on the stove and settled into one of the chairs by the fireplace, his posture showing the bone-deep weariness of hard physical labor. She likes you, he said without preamble. Elena dried her hands on a towel, unsure how to respond. She's a sweet child. She doesn't take to people easily. Mrs. Patterson was here 3 months, and Mia never warmed to her. He stared into his coffee cup. Her mother dying, it made her cautious. She doesn't trust that people will stay. Can you blame her? The words came out before Elena could stop them. Caleb looked up sharply, then nodded slowly. No, I can't. He paused, seeming to wrestle with something. I want you to know that you can stay as long as you need to, even if the work doesn't. Even if this arrangement doesn't suit you, I won't turn you out without prospects. Elena moved to the other chair, sitting carefully as if sudden movement might break the fragile honesty of the moment. Why are you being so kind to me? It's not kindness. It's basic human decency. His jaw tightened. What Garrett did yesterday, leaving you stranded, that was cruelty. I won't add to it. You barely know me. I know enough. He met her eyes directly. I know you stood on that platform with half the town watching and didn't fall apart. I know you've been working since dawn without complaint. I know my daughter hasn't smiled that much in 2 years. He paused. That's enough. Elena felt something loosen in her chest, some tight knot of fear she'd been carrying since the platform. I won't take advantage of your generosity. Didn't think you would? Caleb drained his coffee and stood. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be another long day. He headed upstairs, leaving Elena alone in the quiet kitchen. Through the open windows, she could hear the night sounds of the ranch. Cattle settling, a horse nickering softly, the distant call of an owl. The unfamiliar sounds should have made her feel more alone, more displaced. Instead, they felt oddly comforting, as if the land itself was breathing around her. She climbed the stairs to her small room and changed into her nightgown, exhaustion finally catching up with her. But as she lay in bed watching moonlight paint patterns on the wall, her mind wouldn't quiet. She kept thinking about Mia's joy over neat braids, about Caleb's rough kindness, about the garden responding to water and care, about the possibility, however fragile, that maybe she'd found a place where she could be useful, where her presence added something rather than simply taking up space. It wasn't the future she'd imagined when she boarded the train 3 weeks ago, but perhaps it was something better than that, something real, built on honest work and mutual need rather than romantic fantasy. The days developed a rhythm. Elena woke before dawn and made breakfast while Caleb handled the early barn work. After they ate, she'd spend the morning in the garden or tackling the endless domestic tasks the house required, washing, mending, cleaning spaces that hadn't seen proper attention in 2 years. Afternoons were devoted to Mia's lessons and preparing supper, while evenings passed in quiet routine until darkness sent everyone to bed, exhausted by honest labor. The work was relentless, harder than anything Elena had done in her aunt's house, but there was a satisfaction to it that she'd never felt before. In Philadelphia, she'd worked to avoid criticism, to stay invisible, to earn her keep in a household that made clear she was barely tolerated. Here, every task she completed made a visible difference. The garden flourished under her care, neat rows of vegetables pushing through the soil with renewed vigor. The house slowly transformed from bare functionality to something approaching comfort. Curtains she sewed from old fabric, rugs she beat clean and repositioned, small touches that made the space feel lived in rather than simply occupied. Caleb watched these changes with quiet approval, occasionally offering help but mostly letting Elena work at her own pace. He was a man of few words, communicating as much through silence as speech, but Elena learned to read him. The slight softening around his eyes when he was pleased, the tightness in his jaw when something troubled him, the way he'd stand at the window staring at nothing when the weight of memory became too heavy. A week passed, then another. The routine became comfortable, the work became familiar, and Elena found herself thinking less about Thomas Garrett and what might have been. The shame of that day on the platform still burned when she let herself remember it, but out here on the ranch, surrounded by work and purpose, it mattered less. She was making something here, building something, and that simple fact carried its own kind of healing. It was Mia who asked the question Elena had been avoiding. They were working in the garden together, Elena weeding while the child watered, when Mia said, "Are you going to stay forever?" Elena's hand stilled in the soil. "I don't know, honey. This was always meant to be temporary." "But you like it here, don't you? You smile more now than when you first came." The observation caught Elena off guard. She sat back on her heels, looking at the child's earnest face. "I do like it here. Very much." "Then why would you leave?" It was a child's logic, simple and direct, seeing no reason why liking something wouldn't automatically lead to keeping it. Elena struggled to find words that would make sense without crushing the hope she saw in those gray eyes so like Caleb's. Sometimes life is more complicated than just liking or not liking something, she said finally. I came here because I had nowhere else to go. Your father gave me shelter when I needed it, but that doesn't mean this is my home forever. It could be, though. Mia set down her bucket with a thump. You could stay and be part of our family like Mama was. Oh, sweetheart, Elena's throat tightened. It's not that simple. Why not? Because I'm still the woman who was rejected on that platform, Elena thought. Because your father doesn't want a wife, he wants help with his ranch. Because I've learned not to hope for things that seem too good to be true. But she couldn't say any of that to a 7-year-old girl who'd already lost too much. We'll see, she said instead, the universal parent deflection. For now, let's focus on these tomatoes. They're almost ready to pick. Mia accepted the redirection with the resilience of childhood, but Elena saw her casting sidelong glances throughout the rest of the afternoon, as if trying to decipher something in Elena's face. That evening, the child was quieter than usual, and when Caleb took her up for bed, Elena heard the murmur of serious conversation through the floorboards. When Caleb came back down, he didn't sit but stood by the window, his back to Elena, tension visible in his shoulders. Mia asked you to stay, he said finally. It wasn't a question. Yes. Elena set down the sock she was mending. I told her I didn't know what the future held. That's honest, at least. He turned, his expression troubled. She's getting attached. I should have seen it coming. Should I pull back? Spend less time with her? No. The word came out sharply, then softer. No, that would hurt her more. She needs... He stopped, running a hand through his hair in frustration. She needs exactly what you've been giving her. Attention, teaching. Someone who treats her like she matters. She does matter. I know that. But I can't give her everything she needs. I'm trying, but I'm just... He trailed off, the sentence unfinished, but the meaning clear. Elena stood, moving closer but maintaining careful distance. You're a good father, Caleb. She adores you. She needs more than adoration. She needs a mother. The words seemed dragged from somewhere deep. And I can't give her that. The kitchen fell silent except for the tick of the clock and the soft sounds of the summer night beyond the windows. Elena felt the weight of unspoken things pressing against the air between them, the complicated tangle of need and grief and the simple human longing for connection. I don't know how long I can stay, she said quietly. I don't know what I'm building toward or where I'll end up. But while I'm here, I'll care for her as best I can. Caleb nodded slowly, something like relief crossing his features. That's all I'm asking. But Elena suspected it wasn't all he was asking, just all he could bring himself to say. She suspected there was more beneath the surface, questions about the future, about possibility, about whether this temporary arrangement might become something else. She saw it in the way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she wasn't watching, in the careful distance he maintained, in the quiet gratitude that colored his interactions with her. She suspected it because she felt it too, the dangerous pull of wanting this to be more than it was, of imagining a future that included this ranch, this child, this silent man with his weathered hands and careful heart. But wanting and having were different things, and Elena had learned that lesson too well to forget it now. The heat arrived 3 days later like something physical, a weight that pressed down on the land and refused to lift. Elena woke to air that felt thick even in the pre-dawn darkness, the kind of heat that promised worse to come. By the time she had breakfast ready, sweat already dampened her collar despite the early hour. Caleb came in from the barn looking grim. Going to be a bad one, he said, accepting the coffee she poured. Cattle will need extra water. I'll be out most of the day. What about Mia? Elena glanced toward the stairs where the child still slept. Keep her inside as much as possible. Heat like this can drop a grown man, let alone a child. He drained his cup in 3 long swallows. You should stay in too. The garden can wait. But Elena had already learned that nothing on a ranch could truly wait. After Caleb left, she checked the garden in the relative cool of early morning, watering quickly before the sun climbed higher. The plants were already wilting, leaves curling inward against the heat. She gave them as much water as she dared, knowing the well wouldn't run dry, but conscious of not wasting what might be needed elsewhere. By mid-morning, the house had become an oven despite every window being open. Elena moved through her tasks slowly, conserving energy, while Mia sprawled on the floor with her slate, too listless even for her usual chatter. The child's face was flushed, her dark hair damp at the temples. "I'm hot, Elena," she complained, not for the first time. "I know, sweetheart. Here, drink some more water." Elena pressed a cup into the girl's hands, watching to make sure she drank it all. The heat was oppressive, turning the air soupy and hard to breathe. Through the windows, she could see the land shimmering, distorted by waves of heat rising from the baked earth. Caleb came in briefly at noon, his shirt soaked through, his face dark red from sun and exertion. He drank 3 dippers of water without pausing, then splashed more over his head and neck. "How are you managing?" Elena asked, alarmed by how depleted he looked. "I've worked through worse." But his hand shook slightly as he set down the dipper. "2 of the cattle are down. Heat exhaustion. I got them to shade and water, but—" He didn't finish the sentence, but Elena understood. The unspoken reality of ranch life. Sometimes animals died despite your best efforts, and there was nothing to be done but keep working. He left again without eating, and Elena watched him go with growing concern. The heat showed no sign of breaking, and if anything, the afternoon promised to be even more brutal. She tried to focus on indoor tasks, but her attention kept drifting to the windows, tracking Caleb's movements across the ranch as he worked with dogged determination through the crushing heat. Around 3 o'clock, Mia started complaining of a headache. Elena felt the child's forehead, warm, but that could just be the heat. She made Mia drink more water, then led her upstairs where it was marginally cooler and settled her on the bed with strict instructions to rest. "I don't want to rest," Mia protested, but her voice lacked its usual force. "Just for a little while. Close your eyes." Elena sat beside her, gently stroking the girl's damp hair back from her forehead. Within minutes, Mia had drifted into uneasy sleep. Elena stayed there, watching her, unease building in her chest. Something about the child's color worried her, a flush that seemed deeper than just heat. She told herself she was being overcautious, that it was natural for Mia to be tired in this weather. But the worry persisted, a small cold spot in her mind despite the suffocating heat. When Mia woke an hour later, she was crying. "My head hurts," she whimpered, "and my tummy feels funny." Elena's hand went to the child's forehead again, and this time there was no mistaking it. Mia was burning up. Fever, unmistakable, and climbing fast. "It's all right, sweetheart. You're going to be fine." Elena kept her voice calm even as her heart rate kicked up. She'd nursed her siblings through childhood illnesses, had helped her mother tend sick neighbors. She knew what to do. But knowing and doing while alone in an isolated ranch house in the middle of a heat wave were very different things. She got Mia out of her dress and into a light nightgown, then brought up a basin of cool water and cloths. As she worked, sponging the child's burning skin, her mind raced through possibilities. It could be nothing, a summer fever that would break by morning, or it could be something worse. Scarlet fever, typhoid, the diseases that swept through communities and took children despite every prayer and remedy. "Where's Papa?" Mia asked, her voice small and frightened. "He's working. He'll be back soon." Elena wrung out the cloth and laid it across Mia's forehead. "You just rest now. I'm going to take care of you." The afternoon crawled by in a haze of heat and growing fear. Elena changed the cloths constantly, trying to bring down the fever that showed no sign of breaking. Mia drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes lucid enough to ask for water, sometimes mumbling words that made no sense. Each time Elena checked her temperature with a hand to her forehead, the child seemed hotter. When Caleb finally came in as the sun was setting, Elena met him at the stairs, her face tight with worry. "It's Mia," she said without preamble. "She has a fever, a bad one." The color drained from Caleb's sun-reddened face. He took the stairs 2 at a time, Elena following close behind. In the bedroom, Mia lay still and small under the sheet, her breathing rapid and shallow. Caleb knelt beside the bed, his large hand trembling as he touched his daughter's cheek. "How long?" His voice was hoarse. "Since mid-afternoon. I've been trying to cool her down, but the fever won't break." Caleb's jaw worked,
and Elena saw real fear in his eyes, the kind of terror that came from having already lost one person and facing the possibility of losing another. I need to ride for the doctor. It's 20 miles to town. In this heat, at night? Elena caught herself. Of course he knew the risks. How long would it take? 3 hours there if I push hard, 3 back, plus however long to find Doc Morrison and convince him to come. Caleb stood abruptly, moving toward the door. 6, 7 hours, maybe. If nothing goes wrong. That's too long. The words came out before Elena could stop them. Caleb, look at her. She doesn't have 6 hours. He turned back, and the raw anguish in his face nearly broke Elena's composure. Then what do I do? The question wasn't rhetorical. It was a plea from a man who'd reached the end of his knowledge and found it wanting. Tell me what to do. Elena moved to the bed, looking down at Mia's flushed face.
The child's eyes were closed, her small chest rising and falling too quickly. In the lamplight, her skin had taken on an alarming sheen, and when Elena touched her, the heat was shocking. We fight it here, she said, hearing the determination in her own voice. We keep cooling her down, keep getting fluids in her when she's conscious enough to drink. We don't sleep, we don't stop. We just keep fighting until the fever breaks, or... She couldn't finish that sentence. Or until morning, Caleb said grimly. If she's no better by first light, I ride for the doctor regardless. They worked together through the evening and into the night, falling into a rhythm without needing to discuss it. Elena sponged Mia's burning skin while Caleb went to fetch fresh water, cold from the well. When Mia was conscious, they coaxed water between her lips, a sip at a time. When she slipped into fevered sleep, they watched her breathe, counting each rise and fall of her small chest. The house creaked and settled around them as the day's heat finally began to dissipate. Through the open window, Elena could hear the normal sounds of the ranch, cattle lowing, horses moving in the corral, the distant call of a coyote. The everyday sounds felt obscene somehow, as if the world had no right to continue normally while a child fought for her life. Around midnight, Mia's fever spiked higher. She began to shake despite the heat, her teeth chattering as her body convulsed with chills that made no sense in the sweltering room. Elena wrapped her in a light blanket while Caleb paced, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. This is how it started with Sarah, he said suddenly, his voice rough. Fever that came on fast. She said it was nothing, just a summer cold. 2 days later, she was... He stopped, unable to finish. Elena looked up from where she knelt beside Mia's bed. This isn't the same. Mia is young and strong. She's going to fight through this. You can't know that. No, but I can believe it, and so can you. She reached for his hand, gripping it hard enough that he had no choice but to look at her. She needs you to believe it, Caleb. She needs to feel that you think she's strong enough to survive this. Something shifted in his face, the paralysis of fear giving way to grim determination. He nodded once and knelt beside Elena, his hand joining hers on Mia's burning forehead. Listen to me, little bird, he said softly. I know you're fighting hard right now. I know it hurts and you're scared. But you're a Rowan, and Rowans don't give up. Your mama didn't give up, and neither will you. You hear me? You keep fighting. Mia's eyes fluttered open briefly, unfocused but aware. Papa, she whispered, I'm here. I'm right here, and I'm not going anywhere. The hours blurred together in a haze of heat and fear and relentless repetition. Change the cloth, check her temperature, coax in more water. Elena's back ached from kneeling, her arms trembled with fatigue, but she didn't stop. Caleb moved between the well and the bedroom with mechanical precision, his face set in lines of desperate determination. Around 2 a.m, Elena sent him to rest. I can't, he said flatly. You've been working in brutal heat all day. If you collapse, you're no good to anyone. She met his eyes steadily. I won't leave her, I promise. But you need to close your eyes for an hour, drink some water, eat something. Then you can relieve me. He resisted for another minute, then nodded reluctantly. 1 hour. Then I'm back. Elena listened to his heavy footsteps descend the stairs, then turned her full attention to Mia. The child was restless, tossing despite being barely conscious, her skin so hot it hurt to touch. Elena continued the rhythm they'd established. Cool cloth, gentle words, watching for any change that might signal improvement or decline. Somewhere in those dark hours, Elena found herself talking to Mia, even though the child couldn't hear her. She talked about her mother, about the garden in Philadelphia, where she'd learned to coax things from the earth. She talked about the future, about all the things they'd do together when Mia was well, more lessons, learning to sew, maybe teaching her to bake the bread her mother used to make. She talked about belonging and home and the strange ways that life could surprise you, how the worst day could somehow lead to the best thing. "You have to stay with us," she whispered, wringing out another cloth. "Your father needs you. I need you. You've become so important to me. Do you understand? In just a few weeks, you've made a place for yourself in my heart, and I'm not ready to lose that. I'm not ready to lose you." The admission surprised her with its intensity. When had this child become so essential? When had this temporary arrangement started feeling like home? But there was no time to examine those questions now, not with Mia's labored breathing filling the room and the fever showing no sign of breaking. Caleb returned exactly an hour later, his face drawn, but his jaw set with renewed determination. "Any change?" "Not yet, but she's still fighting." They settled into their vigil together, working in silent coordination that spoke of a partnership deeper than words. When Mia thrashed, they steadied her together. When she needed water, one held her, while the other brought the cup to her lips. When the cloth grew warm too quickly, they changed it in tandem, their movements synchronized. Dawn began to creep through the windows around 5, pale gray light that offered no relief from the heat that was already building. Elena felt exhaustion pulling at her, making her movements clumsy, but she pushed through it. Beside her, Caleb looked haggard, his eyes red-rimmed and his face drawn with strain. "I'm going to ride for the doctor," he said quietly. "This has gone on too long." But before Elena could respond, Mia stirred. Her eyes opened, truly opened, focused and aware, and she looked at her father with confusion. "Papa, why are you in my room?" Caleb's hand shot to her forehead, and Elena saw his whole body go still. Then his eyes closed, and his shoulders sagged with relief so profound it was almost painful to witness. "The fever," Elena breathed, checking for herself. "It broke." Mia's skin was still warm but no longer burning. The terrible heat had receded, leaving behind normal warmth and a child who looked exhausted but aware. She blinked up at them, taking in their disheveled appearance with growing concern. "Did something bad happen? You both look scared." "You were sick, little bird. Very sick." Caleb's voice was rough with emotion. "But you fought through it, just like I knew you would." "I don't remember much." Mia frowned. "Just feeling hot and my head hurting, and Elena talking to me about gardens." Elena felt tears prick her eyes. Relief and exhaustion combining into something overwhelming. "You need to rest now. Real rest. Not fever sleep. Can you drink some water first?" They got half a cup into her before Mia's eyes began to drift closed again. This time her sleep was natural, peaceful, the dangerous edge of crisis past. Elena and Caleb sat beside the bed watching her breathe, neither willing to leave just yet, as if their presence alone could anchor her to this side of recovery. "Thank you," Caleb said finally. His voice was barely above a whisper. "If you hadn't been here, if I'd been alone." "But you weren't alone." Elena reached over and took his hand without thinking, gripping it firmly. "And she's going to be fine. Children are resilient. A few days of rest and she'll be running around like nothing happened." Caleb looked at their joined hands, then up at her face. In the growing morning light, Elena could see every line of exhaustion, every shadow of fear that had marked the night. But she could also see something else, a kind of recognition, an acknowledgement of what had passed between them during those dark hours. "I couldn't have done this without you," he said. "When I saw her lying there burning up, I froze. All I could think about was Sarah, about how helpless I was then. But you didn't freeze. You knew what to do and you did it. And you didn't stop, even when it looked—" He swallowed hard. "You saved her life. We saved her life. Together." The word hung in the air between them, weighted with meanings neither was quite ready to examine. Together. They had worked together, fought together, kept vigil together through the longest night. And in doing so, something had shifted between them. Some boundary had been crossed,
that Elena suspected they couldn't uncross even if they wanted to. She became aware suddenly of how close they were sitting, of Caleb's hand still gripping hers, of the intimacy of this moment in the quiet dawn. She should pull away, should reestablish the careful distance they'd maintained, but she didn't, neither did he. "I need to tell you something," Caleb said, his gray eyes intense on hers. "These past weeks, having you here, it's changed things for both of us. Mia's not the only one who's gotten attached." Elena's breath caught. "Caleb, let me finish, please." He took a breath as if gathering courage. "I know you came here because you had nowhere else to go. I know this was supposed to be temporary, just until you figured out your next move. But somewhere along the way, it stopped feeling temporary to me. It started feeling like maybe this could be something real, something permanent." The words Elena had been both hoping for and dreading hung between them. Her heart hammered against her ribs, hope and fear warring inside her chest. "I don't know what I have to offer you," Caleb continued. "A hard life on an isolated ranch. A man who's better with horses than conversation. A child who needs more than I know how to give her. It's not much compared to what you might find elsewhere." "It's everything," Elena heard herself say. The words came from someplace deep and honest, cutting through all her carefully constructed defenses. "Don't you understand? This ranch, this child, you... It's everything I thought I'd lost when Thomas Garrett walked away. Purpose. Belonging. A place where I matter." Caleb's grip on her hand tightened. "Then stay. Not as hired help or temporary arrangement. Stay as..." He struggled with the words, a man unused to speaking his heart. "Stay as my wife, as Mia's mother, as part of this family." The proposal was nothing like what Elena had imagined during those long weeks traveling west to meet a stranger. There was no romance, no pretty speeches, no promises of easy happiness. But there was something better. Truth, spoken plainly by a man who'd learned the hard way what mattered and what didn't. "People will talk," she said, testing the idea, examining it for flaws. "They already whisper about me being here. If we married after only a month, let them talk. I don't care about gossip. I care about building a life that works, that's honest, that's based on something real." Caleb's voice was firm. "You've proven yourself 100 times over. You've worked harder than anyone I've ever known. You've cared for my daughter like she was your own. You didn't run when things got hard. You stayed and you fought. That's all the proof I need." Elena looked at Mia, sleeping peacefully now, her small face relaxed and free of pain. She thought about the garden thriving under her care, about the house slowly transforming into a home, about the quiet satisfaction of work that mattered. She thought about Caleb's steady presence, his rough kindness, the way he'd looked at her during the long night, like she was essential, like her being there made all the difference. "It won't be easy," she said quietly. "Making this work, building a marriage out of necessity and circumstance. Nothing worthwhile ever is." Caleb shifted closer, his free hand coming up to cup her face with surprising gentleness. "But I think we've got something most couples don't start with. We've already seen each other at our worst. We've already worked through crisis together. We know what we're getting." He was right. There would be no ugly surprises, no discovering too late that they couldn't weather hardship together. They'd already been tested and hadn't broken. "Yes," Elena said, the word coming out steady and sure. "Yes, I'll stay. I'll marry you." Caleb's eyes closed briefly, relief washing over his features. When he opened them again, there was warmth there Elena hadn't seen before. Not the heat of passion, but something deeper and more durable. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away, and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was chaste and solemn, sealing the promise they'd just made. When they pulled apart, Mia was watching them with sleepy satisfaction. "I knew it," she mumbled, a smile tugging at her lips despite her exhaustion. "I told Papa you should stay forever." "You should be sleeping," Elena said, but she couldn't keep the joy from her voice. "I am sleeping. This is a dream." Mia's eyes drifted closed again, but the smile remained. "A really good dream," Caleb laughed, a sound Elena had heard so rarely it startled her. He pulled her close, wrapping his arm around her shoulders, and together they sat watching Mia sleep
as the sun climbed higher and the ranch came to life around them. The heat would return with the day, fierce and unforgiving. There would be work to do, challenges to face, gossip to endure. But for this moment, in the aftermath of crisis and the beginning of something new, Elena let herself simply be present, grateful for the child breathing peacefully, for the man beside her, for the unexpected grace of second chances. She had come west expecting one life and found something entirely different. Not easier, not simpler, but infinitely more real. And as morning light filled the small bedroom, Elena Cross, soon to be Elena Rowan, felt something she hadn't felt since her parents died, the solid certainty of being exactly where she belonged. They let Mia sleep through the morning while the house filled with golden light that promised another scorching day. Caleb finally stood, his joints creaking from the long vigil, and looked down at Elena with an expression she was learning to read. Gratitude mixed with something deeper, something that looked like wonder at finding himself here, at this particular crossroads. "I should check the cattle," he said quietly. "Make sure we didn't lose any more to the heat. And I should start breakfast. You haven't eaten since yesterday afternoon." Elena rose stiffly, her back protesting the hours spent kneeling. "We both need food and rest before we fall over." They moved downstairs together, and the simple act of being in the kitchen side by side felt different now. The air between them held a new quality, anticipation perhaps, or the strange vulnerability that came with having spoken truths that couldn't be taken back. Caleb lingered at the door, his hat in his hands, as if there was something more he wanted to say. "We should do it soon," he said finally. "The wedding, no point in waiting." Elena turned from the stove where she'd been building up the fire. "People will say we're rushing. People will say what they want, regardless of timing. Better to give them something definite to talk about than let speculation run wild." He met her eyes steadily. "Unless you want more time to be certain." "I'm certain." The words came without hesitation, surprising Elena with their firmness. She was certain, not because she'd fallen madly in love or because this was the future she'd dreamed of, but because certainty didn't always come from passion. Sometimes it came from recognizing what was real and choosing to build on that foundation. Caleb nodded slowly, something like relief crossing his weathered features. "Saturday, then. That gives us 5 days to make arrangements. I'll ride into town tomorrow, talk to the minister." "I'll need a dress." Elena looked down at her worn work dress, stained from the garden and rumpled from the long night. "Something decent for a wedding. There's fabric in the trunk upstairs. Sarah bought it before she—" He stopped, his jaw tightening. "She never got to use it. Good quality, cream-colored with small flowers. You could make something from that if you wanted." The offer was complicated, using his dead wife's fabric for his new wife's wedding dress. But Elena understood the gesture beneath it. He was giving her permission to take Sarah's place, to make something new from what had been saved for a future that never came. "I'd be honored," she said quietly. After Caleb left for the barn, Elena stood for a long moment in the quiet kitchen, trying to absorb the speed with which her life was changing. A month ago, she'd been in Philadelphia, packing her single carpet bag with hope and trepidation. 3 weeks ago, she'd stepped off a train expecting one future and finding devastation instead. And now, impossibly, she was preparing to marry a man she barely knew, to become mother to a child who'd captured her heart, to claim this hard life as her own. She should be terrified. She should be questioning every decision. But instead, she felt a strange calm settling over her. The peace that came from no longer fighting against circumstances, but instead choosing to embrace them fully. The morning passed in a haze of necessary tasks. Elena cooked a proper breakfast and made Caleb eat before he returned to work. She checked on Mia repeatedly, relieved each time to find the child's temperature normal, her sleep natural and restorative. By noon, Mia woke properly, weak but coherent, asking for water and then food with the healthy appetite of someone recovering. "Papa says you're going to be my mama," Mia said between careful bites of broth and bread. "For real. Not just helping, but actually my mama." Elena settled onto the edge of the bed, choosing her words carefully. "If that's all right with you, I know I can't replace your mother." "I don't remember her enough to compare," Mia interrupted with the blunt honesty of childhood. "I just know that when you're here, the house feels different, warmer, even when it's hot, like it's supposed to feel." She paused, her small face serious. Does that make sense? Perfect sense. Elena smoothed the child's dark hair, her heart expanding with a fierce protectiveness she'd never experienced before. I promise, I'll do my best to be what you need. You already are. Mia's eyes were drifting closed again, exhaustion still claiming her despite the broken fever. I'm glad you got left on the platform. Is that bad to say? Elena felt tears prick her eyes. No, sweetheart, that's not bad at all. Over the next days, the ranch took on the quality of a place preparing for transformation. Caleb rode into town as promised, returning with news that the minister would perform the ceremony Saturday afternoon at the ranch. He'd also stopped at the general store, enduring Henry's surprise congratulations and bringing back supplies including a spool of white ribbon Elena had mentioned wanting for Mia's hair. The gesture touched her more than expensive gifts might have. It showed he'd been listening, had remembered small details in the midst of everything else. These were the things that built a marriage, Elena thought. Not grand romantic gestures, but daily attention, steady reliability, the choice to notice what mattered to the people you cared for. She found the trunk in Caleb's room, the fabric exactly as he'd described, cream cotton printed with delicate blue flowers, soft and fine quality. Sarah must have planned something special, Elena thought, running her fingers over the material. A dress for some occasion that never came, some hoped-for celebration that illness had stolen away. Thank you, Elena whispered to the woman she'd never meet. I'll take good care of them. I promise. She cut the fabric carefully that evening, working by lamplight after Mia had gone to bed. The pattern was simple. She didn't have time for anything elaborate, but the material deserved respect. As her scissors moved through the cloth, Caleb appeared in the doorway, watching silently. Sarah would have approved, he said finally. She wasn't one for waste. She'd be glad to see it used for something good. Tell me about her. Elena looked up from her work. Not if it's too painful, but I'd like to know. For Mia's sake, if nothing else. Caleb lowered himself into the chair across from her, his large frame making the furniture seem fragile. He was quiet for so long Elena thought he might refuse, but then he began to speak, his voice rough with memory. She was strong. That's what I remember most. Came west alone, survived her intended dying, married a stranger because it made practical sense. She could have been bitter about it, could have spent our marriage mourning what she'd lost, but she chose to build something instead. He paused, his hands flexing. We didn't have a love match at first. That came later, grew slow over years of working side by side, but we had respect from the beginning and trust, and that turned out to be enough foundation for everything else. The parallel wasn't lost on Elena. He was telling her their story while ostensibly telling Sarah's, letting her know what he believed about marriage, about how love could be built rather than simply found. She sounds remarkable, Elena said. She was. And so are you, in different ways. Caleb's gray eyes met hers directly. I'm not trying to replace her with you, Elena. I'm trying to build something new. I want you to know that. I do know it. Elena set down her scissors, giving him her full attention. I'm not trying to be her shadow. I'm trying to be myself, make my own place here. You already have. He stood, moving toward the stairs. The house feels lived in again. Mia laughs. I come in from the fields, and there's good food and clean clothes and someone who... He stopped, struggling with the words. Someone who makes it feel like coming home instead of just coming back to work. After he'd gone upstairs, Elena sat for a long moment with the half-cut fabric in her lap, absorbing what he'd said. This was what they were building, not passion or romance, but something steadier and deeper. A partnership. A home. A future constructed from honest work and mutual need, and the choice to show up for each other day after day. She could live with that. More than live with it. She could thrive in it. The dress came together over the next 3 days, Elena stitching in stolen moments between chores. It wouldn't be fancy, but it would be clean and new and made with care. Mia recovered quickly with the resilience of childhood, though Elena and Caleb both watched her carefully, neither quite able to forget how close they'd come to losing her. On Friday afternoon, a wagon appeared on the road from town. Elena watched from the garden as it approached, recognizing Henry from the general store, and beside him, unexpectedly, a woman in a blue dress. They pulled up near the house just as Caleb emerged from the barn. "Afternoon, Caleb," Henry called, climbing down with the careful movements of a man whose back bothered him. "Heard there's to be a wedding tomorrow. Thought we'd come by with our good wishes." The woman, his wife, Elena assumed, was already moving toward the garden where Elena stood, her expression warm but curious. She was perhaps 50, with graying brown hair and shrewd eyes that took in everything. "You must be Elena," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Catherine. Henry's told me about you, about what happened when you arrived. I'm sorry for that. Thomas Garrett should be ashamed of himself." Elena shook her hand, surprised by the firm grip and the directness. "Thank you. It wasn't the arrival I'd planned." "I imagine not, but it seems things have worked out." Catherine glanced toward the house, then back to Elena. "Caleb's a good man. Quiet, but good. And that little girl has needed a mother. You'll have your hands full, but if you're willing to work, you'll do fine." It wasn't exactly a warm welcome, but it was honest assessment from someone who clearly cared about Caleb and Mia. Elena found she appreciated it more than hollow pleasantries would have meant. "I am willing," she said simply. "Then you'll fit in just fine out here." Catherine reached into the basket she'd brought. "I made you a wedding cake. Nothing fancy, but every bride deserves something sweet on her day." The gesture, unexpected and kind, made Elena's throat tight. "You didn't have to." "Of course I didn't have to. I wanted to." Catherine's expression softened. "We're not a large community out here. We take care of our own. And you're one of us now, whether the wedding's happened yet or not." Henry and Caleb had moved to stand near the garden, their conversation quiet but animated. Elena could see Caleb's posture gradually relaxing, some of the wariness leaving his shoulders. When they finally shook hands, Henry clapped Caleb on the back with genuine warmth. "We'll be here tomorrow, 2:00 sharp," Henry said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Catherine and I, and we'll bring the Johnsons if they're willing. Every wedding needs witnesses." After they left, Caleb stood watching the wagon recede into the distance, his expression thoughtful. "Didn't expect that," he said when Elena joined him. "Neither did I. I thought the town would be—" She trailed off, unsure how to finish. "Hostile? Judgmental?" Caleb's mouth twisted. "Some will be. Martha and her crowd will have plenty to say about how fast this happened, about propriety and scandal. But Henry and Catherine, the Johnsons, a few others, they're good people. They'll stand by us." "That's all we need then." Elena slipped her hand into his, a gesture that still felt new but was becoming familiar. "A few good people in our corner." He squeezed her hand gently, his calloused palm warm against hers. "You're not nervous? About tomorrow?" "Terrified," Elena admitted. "But not about marrying you. About whether I'll be enough. Whether I can really do this, be a wife and mother, make a life out here. You've already been doing it for weeks. Tomorrow just makes it official." He turned to face her fully, his gray eyes serious. "Elena, I need you to understand something. I'm not a man who speaks pretty words or makes big romantic gestures. I'm going to disappoint you sometimes, frustrate you often. This life is hard and lonely, and the work never ends. I know all that. But I'll show up. Every day I'll show up, and I'll work beside you, and I'll do my best to be a good husband and father. I'll be honest with you. I'll provide for you, and I'll stand by you when things get hard." He paused. "That's what I can promise. Is it enough?" Elena looked at this man who'd taken her in when she had nothing, who'd given her purpose and place, who fought for his daughter with everything he had. She thought about the steady reliability he was offering, not passion or poetry, but daily presence and unwavering commitment. It was what Sarah had built a life on, what had created the home Elena could still feel echoes of in this house. "It's more than enough," she said. "It's everything that matters." The wedding day dawned clear and hot, the sky that particular intense blue that promised another scorching afternoon. Elena woke early out of habit, her stomach fluttering with nerves that had nothing to do with doubt and everything to do with the simple magnitude of what she was about to do. Today she would marry Caleb Rowan. Today she would become Elena Rowan, wife and mother, permanently rooted to this place and these people. She dressed carefully in the new dress, pleased with how it had turned out. The cream fabric with its small blue flowers was modest but pretty, the cut simple enough to be practical but feminine enough for a wedding. She'd sewn careful stitches throughout the night, finishing just before dawn, and now she smoothed the skirt with hands that trembled slightly. Mia burst into her room without knocking, her eyes wide. "You look like a princess, a real princess." "I look like a woman in a new dress," Elena corrected gently, but she couldn't help smiling at the child's enthusiasm. "Can I wear the blue ribbon in my hair, the one Papa brought?" "Of course. Come here, let me braid it in properly." They worked together getting ready, Mia chattering excitedly about the wedding while Elena tried to calm the butterflies in her stomach. Through the window, she could see Caleb in the yard, wearing what must be his Sunday clothes. Dark trousers and a white shirt, his hair still damp from washing. He looked uncomfortable in the formal attire, but undeniably handsome, and Elena felt her heart kick unexpectedly at the sight of him. By 1 o'clock, the small gathering had assembled. Henry and Catherine arrived first, followed shortly by a couple Elena hadn't met. The Johnsons, middle-aged and weathered, clearly ranch folk like themselves. The minister came last, a thin man with kind eyes, who'd made the long ride from town. They gathered on the porch where there was shade and a slight breeze. It wasn't a church wedding with flowers and music and rows of guests. It was 5 people standing witness while 2 others promised to build a life together. But there was dignity to it, Elena thought, an honesty that a more elaborate ceremony might have lacked. The minister spoke briefly about marriage as partnership, about the importance of mutual support and shared purpose. He didn't speak of love, perhaps sensing this wasn't that kind of union yet, but of commitment, fidelity, and the choice to stand together through hardship. When it came time for vows, Caleb took Elena's hands in his large, work-roughened ones and spoke clearly. "I, Caleb Rowan, take you, Elena Cross, to be my lawful wedded wife. I promise to provide for you, to protect you, and to stand by you through whatever comes. I promise to honor you, to work beside you, and to build a home with you. I promise to be a true husband to you from this day forward." Elena's turn came, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I, Elena Cross, take you, Caleb Rowan, to be my lawful wedded husband. I promise to work beside you, to care for your home and your daughter, and to stand by you through whatever comes. I promise to honor you, to be faithful to you, and to build a life with you. I promise to be a true wife to you from this day forward." Simple vows, stripped of flowery language, focused on the practical realities of the life they were choosing. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Caleb leaned down and kissed Elena gently, a brief press of lips that sealed their promise. Mia cheered and the small group applauded. Catherine produced the cake she'd brought, and they shared it on the porch along with lemonade Elena had made that morning. It was a modest celebration, but there was joy in it, genuine warmth from their few guests, and relief from Caleb and Elena that they'd taken this step, made their commitment official. "You chose well," Catherine told Elena quietly, while the men talked near the porch rail. "Caleb's the kind of man who'll weather any storm. And that child needs you. Anyone can see that." "I need them too," Elena admitted, "more than I knew." "That's how the best marriages work. Meeting each other's needs, building something together." Catherine squeezed her arm. "You'll do fine, dear. Just remember that every marriage has hard days. The trick is to keep showing up even when it's difficult." The guests departed as the afternoon wore on, leaving the newly formed family alone. Mia, exhausted by excitement and still recovering from her illness, went down for a nap without protest. Caleb and Elena found themselves alone in the kitchen, the reality of what they'd done settling over them like dust after a storm. "Well," Caleb said finally, "we're married." "We are." Elena felt suddenly shy, uncertain of what came next. They'd been living under the same roof for weeks, but this was different. This was permanent, binding, real in ways the temporary arrangement had never been. Caleb seemed to sense her uncertainty. "Nothing has to change tonight," he said quietly. "You can keep your room for now. Take time to adjust. I won't rush you." The offer was kindly meant, giving her space and time, but Elena found herself shaking her head. "I don't need time," she said. "We made promises today. I meant them. All of them." Something shifted in Caleb's expression. Surprise, perhaps, and gratitude. and something warmer that made Elena's pulse quicken. He moved closer, his hand coming up to cup her face with a gentleness that seemed impossible from such rough, work-worn hands. "I'll do right by you," he promised. "I'll be a good husband." "I know." And she did know it, felt it with a certainty that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with recognizing the fundamental decency of the man she'd married. Their second kiss was different from the first, deeper, more personal, carrying the weight of promise and possibility. When they pulled apart, Elena felt something click into place inside her chest, as if a piece of herself she hadn't known was missing had suddenly been found. That night, Elena moved her few possessions from the small storage room to the larger bedroom Caleb had occupied alone for 2 years. The space still bore traces of Sarah, a hairbrush on the dresser, a shawl hanging on a peg. But Caleb had clearly made an effort to clear space for Elena, to make room for her presence. "If there's anything you want changed," he said, watching her set down her carpet bag, "you just say so. This is your room now too. You're home." "You're home." The words settled over Elena with unexpected power. She'd spent so long feeling displaced, temporary, unwanted. But standing here in this room with her new husband, knowing Mia slept peacefully down the hall, Elena felt the first true stirrings of belonging. "It already feels like home," she said quietly. And when Caleb pulled her close, when they lay down together for the first time as husband and wife, Elena understood that she'd been given an extraordinary gift. Not the life she'd planned, not the romantic fantasy she'd carried west on the train, but something real and solid and worth building on. A second chance offered by a stranger who'd seen her at her worst and chosen her anyway. Outside, the summer night sang with crickets and distant cattle. Inside, Elena Cross Rowan closed her eyes and felt herself finally, completely, home. The first weeks of marriage passed in a rhythm that felt both new and strangely inevitable, as if Elena had always been meant to wake beside Caleb, to share coffee in the pre-dawn quiet before the work began, to build a life from the ordinary tasks that made up their days. The heat finally broke in mid-August, giving way to cooler mornings that hinted at autumn's eventual arrival, and with the changing season came a sense of settling, of roots pushing deeper into soil that would hold them fast. Elena woke one morning to find Caleb already dressed, standing at the window watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold. She studied him in the soft light, this man who was her husband, still learning the angles of his face and the way he held himself when he thought no one was watching. "You're up early, even for you," she said quietly. He turned, a slight smile touching his weathered features. "Couldn't sleep. Been thinking." "About what?" "About how much has changed in 2 months." He moved back to the bed, sitting on the edge. "When I saw you on that platform, I never imagined this." His gesture encompassed the room, the house, the life they were building. "Never imagined I'd feel this way again." Elena reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. They'd grown more comfortable with touch over the weeks, small gestures of affection that came more naturally now. "What way?" "Like I have a future worth looking forward to instead of just a present to survive." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "You and Mia, you've given me that." The vulnerability in his admission made Elena's chest tighten. She sat up, pressing close to his side. "You gave me something too, a place to belong, a reason to believe I was worth more than Thomas Garrett saw. You were always worth more than that." Caleb's voice went hard. "That man's a fool." They sat in comfortable silence as the room grew lighter, neither hurrying toward the day's demands. These moments had become precious, stolen time before Mia woke and the ranch required their attention, when they could simply be together without the weight of work and responsibility pressing down. But the peace was short-lived. Around mid-morning, as Elena worked in the garden and Caleb repaired fence line, a rider appeared on the road from town. Elena straightened, shading her eyes against the sun, and felt her stomach clench as she recognized the horse, a showy bay gelding that belonged to Thomas Garrett. She stood frozen as he approached, all the old humiliation rushing back in a cold wave. She hadn't seen him since that day on the platform, had managed to avoid town on the few occasions she'd accompanied Caleb for supplies. But here he was, riding onto her land. No, onto Caleb's land, she corrected herself, though the possessive thought surprised her. Garrett reined in near the garden, his eyes sweeping over Elena with an assessment that made her skin crawl. He'd put on weight since summer, she noticed, his face fuller and his vest straining across his middle. "Mrs. Rowan," he said, and there was something smug in how he spoke her married name. "Heard you'd landed on your feet. Quite the quick recovery." Elena forced herself to meet his gaze steadily, refusing to show the anger and hurt churning in her gut. "Mr. Garrett, what brings you out here?" "Business with Caleb. Feed order for the ranch." He dismounted with the careful movements of someone unused to riding, looping his reins over the fence post. "Though I admit I was curious, wanted to see how you were managing." The condescension in his tone was unmistakable, as if Elena were a charity case he'd been magnanimous enough to reject, and now he'd come to inspect the results of his mercy. Before she could respond, Caleb's voice cut across the yard. "Garrett, didn't expect to see you out this way." Caleb approached from the barn, his stride long and purposeful, and Elena saw something in his expression that made her breath catch. A cold fury, barely leashed, that transformed his usually calm demeanor into something dangerous. "Came about the feed order you placed last week," Garrett said, but his jovial tone faltered slightly under Caleb's stare. "Wanted to discuss pricing, delivery schedule." "We can discuss it at the barn." Caleb's voice was flat, offering no warmth. "No need to bother my wife while she's working." The emphasis on "my wife" was deliberate and unmistakable. Garrett's smile thinned, and Elena saw a flash of something ugly in his eyes. Resentment, perhaps, or wounded pride at finding the woman he'd rejected now claimed by someone else. Of course. Didn't mean to intrude." But Garrett's gaze slid back to Elena, traveling over her in a way that made her want to fold her arms across her chest. "You're looking well, Elena. Better than when you arrived, certainly. Ranch life seems to agree with you." "Mrs. Rowan is thriving," Caleb said, moving to stand between Garrett and Elena. His shoulders were set, his hands loose at his sides but ready. "Now, if you want to discuss business, we'll do it away from the house." He didn't wait for Garrett's agreement, just turned and walked toward the barn with the clear expectation of being followed. Garrett hesitated, his face reddening, before trailing after him. Elena watched them go, her heart pounding with a mixture of anger and something else, a fierce gratitude for Caleb's immediate, unhesitating defense of her. She forced herself back to the garden, pulling weeds with more violence than necessary while keeping one eye on the barn. The men were inside for perhaps 20 minutes, and when they emerged, Garrett's face was tight with barely suppressed anger. He mounted without another word and rode off at a pace that sent dust billowing in his wake. Caleb stood watching until he disappeared, then turned and walked back to where Elena had abandoned all pretense of working and was simply waiting. "What did you say to him?" she asked. "Told him his feed prices were too high and I'd be taking my business elsewhere." Caleb's jaw was tight. "Also told him if he ever looked at you that way again, if he ever spoke to you with anything less than complete respect, he'd answer to me. Made sure he understood I meant it." Elena felt something warm unfurl in her chest. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." Caleb's eyes met hers, fierce and protective. "You're my wife. What he did to you was unforgivable, and I won't have him thinking he can come here and make you feel small. Not on my land, not ever." "Our land," Elena corrected softly. Caleb's expression softened. "Our land," he agreed. He pulled her close, and Elena let herself lean into his solid warmth, drawing strength from his steady presence. "You all right?" "I am now." And it was true. Seeing Garrett again had stirred up old pain, but it couldn't touch her the way it once would have. She was no longer the desperate woman on the platform, no longer defined by his rejection. She was Elena Rowan, with a husband who defended her and a daughter who loved her, and a life she'd built with her own hands. The encounter with Garrett became a turning point of sorts, not because of what he'd done, but because of how little power his presence ultimately had to wound her. Elena found herself thinking less about the past and more about the future, about the life taking shape around her day by day. The garden flourished under her care, producing more than they could eat. Elena began preserving the excess, making pickles and putting up tomatoes, drying herbs and beans for winter. The work was endless but satisfying, Each jar she sealed a promise against the lean months ahead. Mia's lessons continued, the child's reading improving rapidly now that she had consistent instruction. Elena taught her to sew basic stitches, to knead bread dough, to tend the chickens and collect eggs without frightening the hens. The girl soaked up knowledge with the eagerness of someone starved for learning, and watching her grow and flourish gave Elena a satisfaction she'd never imagined. One afternoon in late September, as they worked together making applesauce from fruit Catherine had brought, Mia looked up from stirring the pot and asked, "Can I call you Mama?" Elena's hand stilled on the apple she was peeling. "Is that what you want?" "I think so." Mia's face was serious, thoughtful in the way of children wrestling with big feelings. "I know you're not my real mama, but you feel like a mama. You take care of me and teach me things, and you stayed even when I was sick. That's what mamas do, isn't it?" "That's exactly what mamas do." Elena set down the apple and knelt beside the child, taking her sticky hands. "I would be honored if you called me Mama. So honored." Mia's face split into a radiant smile. "Really? You mean it?" "I mean it with my whole heart." The child threw her arms around Elena's neck, nearly knocking her over, and Elena held her tight while something inside her chest cracked open and reformed stronger. She'd become a mother, not through birth, but through choice and daily presence, and the weight of that responsibility and gift settled over her like a benediction. When Caleb came in later and Mia greeted him with, "Papa, Mama says I can call her Mama," the look on his face made Elena's eyes sting with tears. He'd wanted this for his daughter, had hoped for it, and now it had come to pass not through force or obligation, but through genuine love grown slowly over months of shared life. That night, after Mia was asleep, Caleb pulled Elena close in their bed and whispered against her hair, "Thank you for loving her, for being exactly what she needed." "She's easy to love," Elena murmured back. "You both are." His arms tightened around her. "I never thought I'd have this again. A family. A home that felt alive instead of just functional." "Neither did I." Elena turned in his embrace, searching his face in the moonlight filtering through the window. "I thought Thomas Garrett taking one look at me and walking away was the end of something. I didn't know it was actually the beginning. His loss was my gain." Caleb's hand cupped her face with the gentleness he'd learned to show her. "Best thing that ever happened to me was being in town that day, seeing you on that platform." They made love slowly, tenderly, the physical expression of feelings that had grown deeper than either had anticipated. What had started as practical arrangement had transformed into something real and sustaining, not the passionate romance of storybooks, but something better. A partnership built on respect and daily choice, and the slow accumulation of shared moments that created intimacy. Afterward, as they lay tangled together, Elena thought about the strange path that had brought her here. The rejection that had felt like the end of her world had actually been its salvation. If Thomas Garrett had accepted her, she would have spent her life with a small, cruel man who saw her as property to be evaluated and found wanting. Instead, she'd found Caleb, steadfast, honorable, capable of deep feeling even if he struggled to speak it. "I need to tell you something," she said into the quiet darkness. "What's that?" "I love you." The words felt both momentous and simple, true in a way she'd only recently understood. "I don't know when it happened exactly. Maybe when you stood up to Garrett, or when you fought beside me through Mia's fever, or maybe it's been growing this whole time so slowly I didn't notice. But I love you, Caleb Rowan, not because you gave me shelter or because I'm grateful, but because of who you are. The man you are." Caleb was silent for so long Elena began to worry she'd spoken too soon, revealed too much. But then his arms tightened around her almost painfully, and when he spoke his voice was rough with emotion. "I love you too. Tried not to, told myself it was just convenience and mutual need, but somewhere along the way you became essential to me. Not because of what you do, though you do everything, because of who you are when you're doing it." He paused, struggling for words. "You make everything better just by being here. The house, the ranch, my daughter's life, my life." They held each other in the darkness, these two people who'd found each other through circumstance and built something true through choice. Outside, the September night was cooling toward autumn, and somewhere in the distance a coyote sang its lonely song. But here, in this bed, in this house, in this life they'd constructed from broken pieces, there was only warmth and belonging and the quiet certainty of being exactly where they were meant to be. The months that followed brought their own challenges and rewards. Winter came hard and early, testing their preparations and their resolve. There were days when the work seemed endless, when the cold pressed in and the isolation wore on all of them. But there were also evenings by the fire, Mia practicing her letters while Elena sewed and Caleb carved wooden toys, the three of them together in the warm circle of lamplight while snow piled against the windows. Elena started taking her eggs and preserves to town, selling them through Henry's store. The income was modest but meaningful, money she'd earned herself, proof of her value in tangible form. She used the first profits to buy fabric for new dresses for Mia, watching the child's delight with a satisfaction that went bone deep. On one of these trips to town, she encountered Martha outside the general store. The woman's eyes narrowed with familiar disapproval, but Elena met her gaze steadily. "Mrs. Rowan," Martha said, making the name sound vaguely distasteful. "Still playing house on the Rowan ranch, I see." "Not playing," Elena corrected calmly. "Living. Building a life with my husband and daughter." "Your daughter?" Martha's laugh was sharp. "You mean Caleb's daughter, whom you stepped in to raise after being rejected by Thomas Garrett. The whole town knows the truth of how you came to be here. The whole town knows I was abandoned on that platform, yes." Elena refused to look away, refused to show shame for something that wasn't her fault. "They also know Caleb offered me shelter when I had none, that I worked hard, that I've made a good home for his child. If there's scandal in that, it says more about the people finding scandal than about me." She walked past Martha into the store, her head high despite the trembling in her hands. Henry looked up from his ledger, his face creasing with approval. "Heard that through the window," he said quietly. "Well said, Mrs. Rowan. Well said indeed." The encounter bothered Elena less than it would have months ago. She'd learned that some people would always find fault, would always need someone to look down on to feel better about themselves. But their judgment couldn't touch the reality of the life she'd built, couldn't diminish the satisfaction of work well done, the warmth of Mia's arms around her neck, the solid comfort of Caleb's presence beside her. Spring came eventually, as it always did, bringing new life to the ranch. The garden that had been struggling when Elena first arrived now burst forth with vigor, rows of vegetables pushing through rich soil that had been amended and cared for. Elena planted flowers along the porch, wildflower seeds she'd saved from summer blooms, and watched them grow with a proprietorial pride. Mia turned 8 in April, and they celebrated with a cake Elena baked and small gifts Catherine and Henry brought when they came to visit. The child had grown taller, more confident, her reading now good enough that she could work through simple books on her own. She'd lost the cautious, wounded quality she'd had when Elena first arrived, replaced by the natural exuberance of a child who felt secure in her family's love. "Look at her," Caleb said, watching Mia chase chickens across the yard with shrieking laughter. "Hard to believe she's the same quiet, sad little girl from last year. She just needed to know she was safe, that we weren't going anywhere." Elena leaned into his side, comfortable now with these casual touches. "Children need consistency more than anything else." "So do adults," Caleb observed quietly. "You've given me that too. Consistency, reliability, knowing that when I come in from the fields, you'll be here, that we're building something that will last." On a warm day in late May, almost exactly a year after Elena's arrival, Caleb came in from the barn with an expression Elena had learned meant he'd been thinking seriously about something. "I want to show you something," he said. "Can you spare a few minutes?" Elena wiped her hands on her apron and followed him outside, curious. He led her past the barn to a small rise that overlooked the ranch, the house and outbuildings, the garden, the pastures rolling away toward distant mountains. "I've been thinking about expanding," he said. "Adding on to the house, maybe building a proper workshop. The ranch is doing well enough now that we could afford it." He paused. "But this is your home too. I wanted to know what you thought, what you might want to see changed or added." The question stopped Elena's breath for a moment. He wasn't just consulting her. He was acknowledging her equal stake in this place, her right to shape their future. It was a far cry from Thomas Garrett's evaluation of her as property to be accepted or rejected. "I'd like a bigger kitchen," she said slowly, thinking it through. "Room for a proper table where we could all work together. And maybe a schoolroom for Mia, somewhere she could have her books and slate without being underfoot in the main room." "A schoolroom," Caleb nodded thoughtfully. "I like that. Maybe I could put in some shelving, a desk she could grow into." They stood together on the rise, planning and dreaming, their shoulders touching as they looked out over the land they'd made home. Elena thought about the frightened woman who'd stood on that platform a year ago, certain her life was over. She couldn't have imagined this. Couldn't have dreamed that rejection would lead to redemption, that being found wanting by one man would lead to being chosen by another who saw her true worth. "Are you happy?" Caleb asked suddenly. "Truly happy, not just making the best of things?" Elena turned to face him fully, taking both his hands in hers. "I'm happier than I ever imagined I could be. This life, this family, you, it's everything I didn't know to want. Even though it's not what you planned, even though you came west expecting something different, especially because of that." Elena smiled, and she could feel how different that smile was from the tentative, hopeful expression she'd worn stepping off the train. "What I planned was a fantasy based on pretty letters and desperate hope. What I found was something real. Better than fantasy because it's solid and true and built on work and choice instead of romantic imagination." Caleb pulled her close, and they stood wrapped in each other while the spring wind moved through the grass and the ranch spread out below them, like a promise kept. In the distance, they could hear Mia singing to herself as she worked in the garden, her clear voice carrying on the breeze. "Thank you," Caleb said quietly, "for taking a chance on us, for staying when you could have left, for building this life, even when it was hard. Thank you for seeing me when I felt invisible, for giving me a place to belong." Elena pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. "For loving me even though I arrived as someone else's reject. You were never a reject. You were a blessing that fool was too blind to recognize." Caleb kissed her forehead, her cheeks, finally her mouth. "My blessing. Mine and Mia's." They walked back to the house, hand in hand, and Elena felt the rightness of it settle into her bones. She'd come west as Elena Cross, mail-order bride, expecting to trade her service for security and hoping for basic kindness. Instead, she'd become Elena Rowan, wife and mother, and full partner in a life that demanded everything and gave back tenfold. The summer stretched ahead of them, full of work and heat and the endless cycle of ranch life. But Elena faced it without fear, knowing that whatever challenges came, they would face them together. She'd learned that strength wasn't found in avoiding hardship, but in walking through it with people you trusted, building something solid from whatever materials life provided. That night, after Mia was tucked into bed and the house settled into quiet, Elena stood at the bedroom window, looking out over the land silver with moonlight. Caleb came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured. "About how far I've come, about how different everything is from what I expected." She covered his hands with hers. "About how grateful I am that Thomas Garrett tore up my photograph and walked away." She felt Caleb's smile against her neck. "His loss, my gain." "Our gain," Elena corrected. "All of ours. Mia got a mother, I got a family, you got a partner, and all because someone cruel did something meant to hurt me, and you chose to be kind instead." They stood together in the moonlight, three souls sheltered under one roof, the widowed rancher, the rejected bride, and the motherless child who'd all found what they needed in each other. Outside, the Montana summer sang its ancient song, and inside, Elena Cross Rowan closed her eyes and felt herself completely, finally, utterly home. The woman who'd been left on a sun-scorched platform with nothing but a torn photograph and shattered dreams had found something better than what she'd lost. She'd found purpose in honest work, worth in being chosen, and love in the slow building of trust and partnership. She'd found that sometimes the worst moments opened doors to the best futures, that rejection could lead to redemption, and that home wasn't a place you traveled to but something you built with your own hands alongside people who chose to stay. And on this ranch, Under these wide Montana skies, Elena had finally, completely found her way home.